Good evening, everybody. On behalf of LAist, welcome to TV Pilot Club. Tonight, we take a look back at the first episode of The Office. My name's John Cohn. I manage live events for KPCC and LAist. Throughout tonight's event, I invite you to engage with us and your fellow attendees in the chat section. Think casual, think candid, think book club. All of the programming you hear on KPCC and see on LAist is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you to all of you. If you're not already a member and are in a position in which you can give, go to support.laist.com/events. That link hopefully is appearing in the chat right now. And if you want to stay up to date on upcoming events, both virtual and eventually in person, please sign up for our events newsletter. You should also see the link for that on your screen somewhere and post it in the chat. Thank you all again for joining us tonight. And without further ado, LAist arts and entertainment reporter, Mike Roe.
So great to be with all of you this evening. Thanks so much for joining us for the LAist TV Pilot Club, talking about The Office this month. I have a great panel with me tonight. I'd like to introduce comedian and writer Eliza Skinner, who is with us. She is the head writer and co-EP of Earth to Net on Disney+, along with many other fine accomplishments throughout her career. Welcome to Eliza. Welcome to podcaster Tiff Arment, co-host of the Office podcast, Somehow I Manage, a fantastic podcaster, and so glad to have her with us. And I've got here podcaster Chad Hopkins, who's co-host of the Office podcast, An American Workplace. Welcome, Chad. It is so great to have all of you with us tonight. Just to start out, I was sort of wondering if we could talk a little bit about, what was it that sort of first pulled you into The Office? Like, was there a character or an episode or something that first grabbed you? I know we're sort of going back to the beginning, but if you have any thoughts on any of that, why don't we start with Chad? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, well, thanks for having me here first, but I am going to date myself a little bit by saying that The Office was first coming out when I was in middle school, and so I think I'm maybe a little bit younger here. I don't know for sure, but I actually didn't really watch it then, but I do remember having friends talk about it back then. And I don't know if I really had an appeal for it at the time, but I did finally visit when I got to college. My roommate and I had a habit of trying to revisit or watch a TV show a semester at least. And so that's when I first dove in, and the show was 4 or 5 seasons deep at that point. And I remember just laughing a whole bunch. I mean, it was just like a new show to watch for me. It was a show that had been around for a little bit, had been established. A lot of people enjoyed it. And so it was sort of just like checking out the hype for me. And it just became one of those shows that for so many people, and myself included, it was something I had to watch over and over again. And so it became one of those shows that I would watch through it at least once a year. And I know that pales in comparison to some fans who are out there who literally watch it on a loop.
Yeah, I mean, now it's on Peacock. It makes it even easier. Tiff, I was curious, like, what sort of first brought you into the show, and also, like, your podcast, like how, what made you want to start going through it episode by episode and doing that show?
I came to The Office as a UK Office fan. Actually, I fell in love with that show first, and I loved it. And when the American one came along, I thought it was awful. Like, I couldn't stand the pilot. I was like, they are just ripping off this wonderful British humor and ruining it. They're wrecking the whole thing. But I stuck with it, and it turned into one of my absolute favorite shows, which I would have on a loop in my house. Like, it was my comfort show. It was always on when I wanted it. And I'm a big rewatcher, just generally, of things. So The Office was just always that easy show to put on. And you just always found something funny every single time that you watched it. And so, being that I watched it all the time, I was like, I need to do a podcast about it. And a friend of mine, Micah Sargent, he was saying that he also was thinking about doing a Office podcast show. And I was like, oh, we should call it Somehow I Manage. And we should, he was like, I'd love for you to be a guest on my show. And I was like, okay, I'll be a guest. And
then you slowly took over. And
it kind of like, he didn't do the project for a few years. And then I was like, all right, we got to do this. Let's just do it. And so we started it together, and the rest is history, really. And we're still doing it. We're in season 7, finally.
Nice. Eliza, me and you are sort of the fans on here who don't have our own podcast talking about The Office, but, enjoy the show. I was
Mhm.
curious, like, what you remember from when you were watching the show and maybe what grabbed you. And then, like, what was it like going back and rewatching the pilot again?
When I was watching the show, I wasn't actually that big of a fan of the UK Office. But it was such a big deal in comedy. Like you had to love The Office. So I would watch that and like find aspects of it that I liked, but aspects of it that I was like, this is just a terrible person that I'm being asked to laugh at. Like I just hate him, not in a fun way. So when the American Office came along, I was like, okay, maybe this is going to be different. Or maybe like, I just want to see what they do with it. And I really liked what it evolved into, in that they made the Michael Scott character a lot more, that he wanted to be loved. And so there was always something that he was like, no matter how noxious he was, it was kind of in pursuit of love. And that felt like it worked a lot better for me. So that's what I remember from watching it at the time when I did. Going back and watching this first episode, I was like, oh, this is all of what I didn't like about that UK Office. Like, it's like, look at us. Look at us straight white men and what we're allowed to do. And everyone has to laugh while we do it. No one can say, hey, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was really interesting, like going back and watching this in 2021 and seeing like, oh, like they would have approached this way differently if this was coming on the air now. Yeah, like, I think that some of what it evolved into would still have been part of it, but it was interesting, like, in the opening credits, like it's all white cast members. It's the other characters like have a chance to evolve and become characters on the show eventually, but like there's no Mindy Kaling yet, and etc. I was curious, Tiff, what was sort of your experience going back and watching this pilot again? I thought that there are bits from like this episode and the first couple episodes that really stick with me. I think that like I think that John Krasinski is very likable and right off the bat, and sort of grows from there. But what sort of was your entryway here?
I guess what struck me the most, now that I'm really watching the show with a real analytical eye every single week, is how many things were started already in this pilot. Like they laid the groundwork and they set a precedent for so many different things really quickly in a 20-minute episode. I mean, I made a little list. I have they have the Dwight and Jim pranks, right? They have the Jim and Pam friendship already started. They have Michael's proclivity to distraction comics and his comedy proclivities, and the fake firings, the assistant to the regional manager joke is in here. There is downsizing. They talked about downsizing in the pilot. Like that becomes a theme basically until season 6, where the company gets sold, like spoilers. And it's kind of amazing that all of this is crammed into the pilot. And if you are an avid if you're an avid rewatcher, you are kind of I'm surprised that this all fit in there and that they started it all right away.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it really is. One thing I've been looking at lately is like, what makes a good pilot? Like what is you have to do so much work in a pilot to be able to get people on board, introduce all your characters, have it not come across like you're introducing all your characters, and doing it in just over 20 minutes. I thought that they definitely did a good job like introducing their main cast, and you very much knew who these characters were, for better or for worse. I thought that when this show first came out, I was in like one of those I was doing like data entry, so I think that's like why I connected with it at the beginning. And I remember watching the show, and Jim, this is a couple episodes later, he talks about how if he kept working here, this would become his career, and if he did that, he'd have to throw himself in front of a train. And I remember like having that feeling, and I think a lot of people related to it, and that's why it became like a show that like sort of showed that office culture and wanting to break out of that. But yeah, go for it.
I think that they also had did a good job of not making it look like, oh, we're showing you all of our characters, because they weren't. They were showing just these, here are the fundamental main characters, but we're going to have, at least for the first season or maybe even two, it's going to feel like we've got an endless supply of more fun, very developed characters that are going to be folded in from the rest of this office. So like, I mean, they were referring to Angela, but we don't really meet Angela.
Yeah, she gets like a line or something, and
Yeah,
you barely meet some of these
and her
characters.
cat is she's throwing a party for her cat.
I think that's part. Yeah, I mean, as I fully support cat birthday parties, so I'm a big fan. But that's a good point. Like talking about like those characters that eventually become part of the show. The pilot like wasn't well reviewed. A lot of people felt it was a ripoff of the UK Office. Like they were like, why are they just doing the same thing? And then obviously the rest is original writing, the rest of the season. But wasn't really getting a lot of viewers from the beginning. A lot of people were wondering, like, is this really gonna work, especially given how many British shows fail over the years? I was curious, Chad, like, what was did you think that when you watched it, like, did it grab you like from the pilot? Did it take a few episodes for you to be like, oh yeah, this is my thing? Or where do you sort of come into it with?
I'm not sure if I remember my initial reaction, but
Yeah.
I think like most people, it probably took me a few episodes to really get into it. I mean, the very next episode is Diversity Day.
Yeah.
And I mean, that really grabs you. That there's some heavy stuff that goes on in there. And speaking of Mindy, that's when we get to meet her. And I think we meet Toby in that episode as well. He's absent from here, the pilot as well. And so watching this episode now and knowing that it is sort of a carbon copy, more or less, from the original British show, it's just like a very like, let's Americanize this and let's move this over here and make this character named Jim or whatever. I admit I haven't watched the UK Office, but I that's what I understand, is that it is just pretty much a let's just see what would happen if we put this script with these actors. And so letting them get on their own footing after this episode and letting them come up with their own ideas and exploring the characters further. And as Eliza was talking about just a second ago, seeing some of the other characters delved into a little bit further in the coming episodes. I mean, we talked about you mentioned the straight white people in the credits at the beginning. The other cast members, Angela, Kevin, Oscar, all those other people weren't even main cast members until we get to Booze Cruise in another season. So it really was focused on like the 5 characters we get on this episode. And so I like that after we get past this one, it's like, okay, let's meet some other people. Let's see what's really going on here. And let's see what they think of Michael.
Yeah, one thing I was sort of wondering, like someone in the chat brought up that in the early episodes, it seemed like they were trying to make Ryan a bigger character than he ended up being. I had the same feeling when I saw the opening credits. I'm like, why is BJ Novak in the opening credits like throughout the series when Ryan is almost always a background character throughout most of it? And he has some storylines, but it was interesting to see like that was the choice. He came from one of the writers, etc. But I was curious about like,
weren't they all? Weren't they all the writers?
Not all of them. Like I know that Toby was, Angela's not, and a few of them are just background actors. A few of them are writers that got brought in. But it was really interesting too. I was going to mention one other thing, that I was definitely a fanboy back in the day. I remember there was a thing where they were like so desperate to get people to watch the show that they would blog from the set because their computers were all actually hooked up to the internet. And so I remember sending a message to Jenna Fisher on MySpace, is how long ago this was, and getting like some career advice back. And it was really lovely. And I was like, oh, cool. I should move to LA. All right, good to know. And, I was curious about like, Tiff, do you have any memory of like, did you like get grabbed by those early episodes? Did you feel like those characters, like, speaking of like Ryan, like, do you feel like he ever became like what it seemed like they were setting him up to be? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, Ryan specifically, or like any other character?
Yeah, any of them. Feel free to take a dive.
And again, like, referencing back to the UK Office, which when you're watching this pilot, you really can't help but do that because that's what it was. And especially from someone like me who came to the show from that show. I mean, like you were saying, there's like direct clones, like everyone the character, the basis of a lot of these characters were direct clones from that show. I mean, it's Tim and Jim. Like, you can't get very much closer than that. But I've always liked the character of Gareth, who Dwight is based on. So I was very into the Dwight character. I like the pranking and the like brotherly animosity between him and Jim. I really like that dynamic that they have. I wasn't very into the Michael character because I thought he was going to be a lot like the David Brent character, who never becomes redeemable. He never gets a story arc. I mean, I guess that's the difference between 2 seasons and 9 seasons. But you know, of course, like everyone sees, Michael grows on you, and he grows on everyone, and because we get to see his heart. And with someone like Ryan's written to be this foil all the time. He's just kind of awful. Like, and he starts off strange and as an outsider, as the temp in this episode. I am surprised, and I always forget that he is in the pilot. I feel like he's one of those characters that as a temp you would think this is someone that would get introduced later on in the first season, not right away, but he's there. And he continues to kind of be this this weird friction that follows the show along. He's almost the villain sometimes because he's so obnoxious and annoying, but I think he's necessary. We need that foil. We need that like little paper cut that is Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ryan having that there helps to make Michael more likable by comparison at times. And they put in some of these other characters that it's really easy to get upset with Michael at a lot of things he says, but I think that some of the other characters help to make his come off a little less terrible by comparison. I was wondering, looking at the pilot, one thing that sort of grabbed me watching this was how they're already sort of establishing this whole world. Like you mentioned, like we just see like a moment of Angela, we see a little bit of folks in the background, we hear from corporates, we get like Michael's friend Todd Packer making even more offensive jokes than Michael does. And it was like interesting to see like how it felt like, oh, there's a lot of places they can go with this. Chad, I was sort of curious about, what did you sort of think about the way that this was all set up? Me and Tiff were talking about like how it seemed like they established so much, but what was sort of the setup of this that grabbed you?
Well, something that caught me rewatching today was that for about half the episode, they have you believe that Pam and Jim are in a relationship. They don't specifically say, oh, my friend Jim or my friend Pam. It's like we get flirty glances. We see that big old grin from Pam when she's talking about Jim in her talking head. And then all of a sudden, boom, Roy walks in. And, oh, by the way, I'm engaged to Roy. It's been about 3 years. Maybe we'll get married in the spring. And so right away, the romance, I think, draws people in. And I think that was the early draw, more than anything else, was establishing that relationship really early on. And we see this couple that's not a couple. They seem to be perfect for each other. They seem to really dig each other. And obviously Jim is very into her, and it kind of seemed like she was into him until, oh, maybe she shouldn't be. And the instant tension that creates with Roy showing up and then Pam walking off to do her work and Jim kind of awkwardly trying to make conversation like, so maybe you should come join us too, Roy. We're gonna go get some drinks. How about that? And he just walks off. I'll talk to her later.
No, this isn't happening. We're not.
And so that tension is fascinating. Like right away, what's going to happen with this? There's clearly something there between Jim and Pam, but Roy. So what's going to come next? And so I think right away they've got that hook. What's going to happen in episode 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of rom-com feeling is what grabbed a lot of folks. Like, I feel like that Michael's like the attention grabbing thing that sort of you sort of gawk at, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And then you go like, oh, my heart is drawn to Jim and Pam's love that cannot be at the moment. And it was interesting to see how that happens. Like, one of the comments in the chat was, mentioning how Ryan gets more interesting later when he's dating Kelly on and off, and just how he's very he starts off a bit dull, but then you sort of see those relationships. And it's interesting, like the show has so many relationships it builds over the years, but it starts with that Jim and Pam one at the core. One thing that I was sort of wondering about was, looking at this pilot, I was curious, we were talking about how they tried to take a character like Michael, and in the pilot, it seemed like all the shows in the early 2000s decided that having these white characters who are the butt of the joke because they're racist, that was the way to address it, instead of just not saying racist things on television. I was curious, Eliza, just coming out of writing for television, what was sort of your thought on how the shows were written at that time and how it's evolved since then?
Oh yeah, it was tons of that. It was tons of we're being ironically racist, we're being ironically homophobic, ironically sexist, and even back then I was doing stand up and improv, and it was really frustrating trying to get across the idea that but you're still saying those words, and not everybody is laughing at them the way that you think they're laughing at them. I mean, Dave Chappelle stopped doing his show, right? Because people were laughing at the jokes he was making in absolutely the wrong way he was intending them. So yeah, it was definitely a frustrating part of that era of comedy in general, not just TV comedy.
Yeah. It was interesting. Just this past summer, it was 4 or so NBC shows had to pull blackface episodes off of streaming. Oof. It was 30 Rock, The Office, Scrubs. I think 1 or 2 others also did, just because it was all these shows did blackface in the early 2000s.
It was just this really weird, frustrating. I mean, that's terrible, but there was also just this really weird, frustrating thing where it was we're doing the smart move of saying, oh, I know that I accidentally said something racist to this this Black person working in a store that I'm in, or whatever, in a scene in a TV show. And so it's all going to be focused on my emotion as the white person who said that, rather than the person who got that said to them. In the same, they all become objects in the same way that even rewatching it. I mean, I was a huge Office fan. I wrote my first spec script was an Office spec, but rewatching it, I'm oh, Pam is just an object. It's who wins Pam? Roy or Jim?
Ryan
Not
treated me like an object. No, sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry, I was just quoting a quote from it. Never mind.
Well, but it's what did she want? And that it was just sort of oh, if we get this guy out of the way. And I feel like Jenna Fisher did a great job of injecting that into it. But the real structure that was handed to us was, if this one guy wasn't in the way, then our guy could get the girl he wants, which is that's not a whole person.
That's really interesting. I feel like Pam's character, very much is sort of the damsel in the tower in the pilot, and then I think she evolves so much through the show. I think they do let her develop her own interests, and they start letting her not have quite the same sort of mousy look, and she becomes, I think, in a way equal characters with everybody else in a way that she's kind of not in the pilot. Tiff, I was curious, what did you think about how Pam starts out? And also I was curious how you felt the Pam and Jim relationship compared to the UK Office version of that relationship. It's obviously similar, but I feel like the actors are very different. So I was curious about your thoughts.
The Tim and Dawn relationship never went anywhere. Never happened in that show. They didn't get together. They didn't. Well, it just ended.
You saw the Christmas special, right?
Yeah, she has she's in the house in America or something with, right? Isn't that what happened in the Christmas special?
Don't they kiss?
I don't even think they're together.
Oh man, I need to go this now.
I think now I do too. I haven't watched it in so long.
They're playing the Yaz song and Only You.
I mean, even if they do kiss, they don't end up together, because there is that episode, that follow-up one where she has the family and she's off with the fiance that she was with and doesn't end up with him, right? Isn't that correct? So it's a whole different vibe. And I feel like for the American audience, you know, we wanted Jim and Pam to get together. So the show found a way to have them get together. Like, and we talk about this in our show. Once Jim and Pam start dating and get together and that tension is gone, so much of the focus goes away from them. And like you were saying, like everyone was saying in the pilot, it is kind of intriguing to watch that beginning because we think it's this one thing. We find out that there is a rival, and how is this going to play out? So, I mean, who isn't intrigued by a romantic plot? It's one of those things that it drives so much of television. And what I love about The Office, though, is it's not just that. It's not just the romantic plot. There's so much more going on. There's so many more relationships going on that drive our curiosity. And I just enjoy that. I enjoy that it's about individuals more than about who people are with each other.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, there's a lot of Pam discussion in the chat talking about, you know, when Jim finally, you know, gets together with her, he totally takes her for granted. You know, I think they do a good job sort of like pushing them apart at end times and letting them come back together. And then also she's like emotionally cheating on her fiance at the beginning. And they, you know, because we're coming from Jim's perspective, it doesn't seem that terrible, but she's already sort of like, seems like, you know, going with the momentum of things than actually caring about Roy at the beginning of this.
And he's kind of sleazing on a taken woman. I mean, on somebody who's in an engaged relationship, and he's still like, all right, I'm watching what kind of yogurt you're eating. Come on. Like,
yeah, it's like it's so weird, like how much like a show it chooses like what point of view we're looking at things through. So because of that, we're like, oh, cool, like, yeah, Jim, come on. And then it's like, wait a second, why am I rooting for this woman to cheat on her fiance?
I mean, I had seen all the stuff online about how like Jim's really the villain, but hadn't really watched it, or certainly not watched it critically. But he's a psychopath. I mean, who puts that kind of effort into making Jell-O just to infuriate the people that you work with? I was
it's like, a very toxic workplace.
He's a bad
from
guy.
The start. Yeah, like it's like I feel like everybody in this like hates their job so much, and it's like they obviously hired all the wrong people to work here. I guess other than Dwight, I feel like it's the perfect fit for this office.
But can you imagine actually like we've all had jobs that we hated. But can you imagine actually doing something like that to your coworker who's also sitting there hating it, but just in a different, annoying to you way, or your boss?
Yeah, I'm used to microaggressions in the workplace, not like aggressions. Like, you know, I was curious, Chad. I was wondering, like, you know, we haven't talked much about Dwight yet. Speaking of crazy behavior in the office, what was sort of your thought on how his character is established? You know, we mentioned how we already have the assistant to the regional manager thing starting here, and you know, maybe what it looked like he was here and where he went from the pilot.
What I like about Dwight early on is some of the stuff Tiff was talking about earlier, how it's so established early on. We hear from various other podcasts like Office Ladies and Brian Baumgartner's podcasts that Dwight sort of improvised, or Rain improvised, the whole Amish thing in like rehearsals, and that just became part of the character later. Like in this first episode, he's singing the Little Drummer Boy song, and then we later find out that's Angela's favorite song. And the volunteer sheriff is established here, and the assistant to the regional manager that Tiff mentioned as well earlier. I love how all those like Dwight lore things are introduced here. And I mean, I don't know if I've ever met a person like Dwight Schrute in my life who's just like that intense about what he's doing at work, especially in a place like a paper company. I mean, kudos to him. He's there to work and no nonsense about it. I love the mystery of why is his phone headset locked in his drawer? Is he really that paranoid about the people he works with? Which, I mean, I guess, yeah, maybe he should be with Jim sitting next to him.
They're putting his belongings in desserts. Yes.
Right, it's like, right. I don't want to work with Jim. I think that seems terrifying.
See, I have the opposite feeling. I'm like, I would love to work with Jim. I would like go head to head ranking all the time. I'm like, I'm so into that.
But
yeah, I mean, it's
when do you sell the paper? You got to sell the paper at some point.
I love Jim. Like he has the account that like makes up his year that he can go do and lets him coast apparently the rest of the time.
Mhm.
It's one thing that I thought was interesting too that they developed from here is like, obviously they're trying to create like the most boring possible job. They're like, oh, selling paper. That seems like a thing that we don't have to pay that much attention to the business part of this. We can focus on these characters. That came from the British version as well. There was somebody in the chat was asking about whether Dunder Mifflin was modeled on a known office or company or business. I don't think there's any specific one, but it very much feels like I think it really is just sort of an amalgamation of people's office experiences. And although I was reading a thing that the Staples later did sell office products, so that were branded. So it all comes together in the end. I was curious, Tiff, like, oh, there's a lot of Dwight fans in the chats, are very, very excited about Dwight. Tiff, I was curious, like, what did you think about some of those early relationships, like between Dwight and Michael and Dwight and Jim, and how those start?
I really enjoy the Dwight and Jim relationship. I know people think it's problematic and there are flaws, of course. And like if this were real life, obviously it would be extremely hostile. But I really love if the early 90s have taught me nothing, it's that you show affection through being mean, right? So like I'm joking, but like that is I really like that attitude, joking around and fooling around. Like I'm very into that. I'm that kind of person. So I very much gravitate towards that kind of relationship. And when you look at the Michael and Dwight, the kind of power struggle that they have, even right away in the pilot, it is kind of like Michael is trying to assert his power as manager, which he really doesn't have. I mean, his power more is the power of attention, and that's what he wants as manager as opposed to leadership. And Dwight wants the power and the leadership. And so we see that kind of like tension between them building, and I get the underling idea that Dwight has, and he's stuck in this perpetual like assistant to realm, and he's trying to build his way out of it throughout the series, until he gets to a point where he feels like it doesn't matter anymore because he's making enough money, but that's for later. So these relationships between these people, as they are building, it's kind of one of the, like I said before, it's one of the delights of the show.
Yeah, it's interesting, like it's sort of having those layers of managers. I remember I've been in situations in the past where I have like the manager who has to answer to the manager, and it's always like interesting to see like how it all gets funneled through. And I think that was another thing I found relatable going back and looking at this pilot again. Some comments from the chat. Someone was mentioning how I think Jim was trying to figure out how close to fired he could get. Like it seems like if he was fired, he would be pretty cool with that. So there's not really any consequences that he can face for what he does. And I think that's the same thing like with some of the other behavior that happens here, is that most of them are like good salesmen, so they're like hitting their numbers, but there's a ineffectual HR person who does not ever do anything about it. So Chad, I was sort of curious about if you had any thoughts on what do you think that sort of like how did The Office influence later shows? It was sort of the beginning of the whole mockumentary style. They sort of don't follow that as much later in later episodes, the idea that there's this documentary being made. But I was sort of curious what you thought about that influence.
Well, it was really clear that The Office sort of just like changed a lot of things, and it in one way introducing Michael Schur to the world and seeing all the shows that he's left in his path as he's gone through with Parks and Rec and The Good Place and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and a lot of those kind of shows that do use that setup of it's dry in a certain sense and very I'm trying to think of the right word to describe it, but it's true to life. I mean, admittedly, I've only seen a little bit of Parks and Rec, and so I haven't experienced a lot of that. But what I've seen is very similar in vein to The Office, and from what I understand, that was intended to be initially at least a spinoff from The Office in a certain respect. I think with Karen, and excuse me, and So seeing this I don't know. I was young when The Office first came out, so I just see the shows that have followed in its path, and it seeing like Friends in the 90s, where comedy is like we're friends hanging out and we're all like really sexy too, and then now we have The Office and there's very few sexy people. It's like we're working in a plain place. This is a real place. We're interacting with each other. We have these relationships, and I think we see more of that as we progress in TV in general.
Yeah, I definitely think that's really interesting. And then mentioning Mike Schur, like one thing I was reading about beforehand was just about how when 30 Rock started a little bit later, they had Mike Schur was sort of helping out with the pilots, and they were trying to decide whether or not to get this other writer, Robert Carlock, or to get Mike Schur to pair with Tina Fey. And it ended up coming to Robert Carlock, but it was like, I was talking with someone about like what a different show that would have been with Mike Schur as the sort of co-voice behind it, because all those shows that you mentioned, like he always brings a sort of interesting kindness to them with The Good Place and shows like that. One thing I was curious, Eliza, like, how do you think that this sort of like changed sitcoms and TV writing going forward? Like, I know it seems like it's still impacting what came afterwards with, popularizing the formats and some of that style.
Well, I mean, it definitely, like, yeah, it's the first big mockumentary style show I remember, and then there was, as you said, Parks and Rec and Modern Family.
Yeah.
So there was definitely that, but I think one development that I saw was the change from this pilot and probably most of the first season of The Office into the rest of The Office, to me, mirrors the beginning of that first mini season of Parks and Rec, and then the next season of that, in that they were characters developed for like a cold kind of comedy where they're archetypes, but they're kind of cruel and unlikable, and they do what they do to get a laugh from the audience. And then in the second season, in both they find this heart for them, that like, oh, all of these people, like in Parks and Rec, it was very much like give each character a vulnerability. So April is no longer just a murderer that works with them. Now she's like in love with the guy down the hall. And in this, I mean, I think a lot of it was the Michael Scott, but also just the overall tone of the show. In the pilot, it felt like it was like we all secretly hate this place and hate each other. And then later it developed, I think, very quickly. And I think why it survived, we all secretly love each other and love this place. And we'll do secret loving things for one another. Like we'll find little notes or little gestures that have happened. And I think that I think was something that has gone through TV, because I think in the 80s we had all these sitcoms that were not coms. They were just situations. There was no comedy. It was just like, this is a family. Welcome to Growing Pains. Welcome to like I was rewatching Blossom recently, and I was like, is this a comedy? It's just like a pleasant family.
Yeah, it's just like something to while away our evenings to have on our television.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had, like, as I said, this attempt at just like real funny, almost a sketch show kind of thing. And then it kind of eased out into there is a heart here, but there is real comedy writing also. And how do we blend those two and kind of look at that as the gold standard?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting watching, like, I think the sitcom recently that really blew me away was the Saved by the Bell reboot, just because it was like, so like, I was like, oh, they're being really funny and also really compassionate and really diverse, which so few shows are able to do. And I was like,
also a Peacock show.
Yeah, also a Peacock show. So after you've got your subscription to watch The Office, I recommend going over and checking out the Saved by the Bell reboot. It's surprisingly great. I was also going to mention, looking at the chat, a lot of fans of that Dwight and Jim relationship. Someone mentioning they like when they team up to do a sale and Dwight pumps himself up by listening to metal. Someone's mentioning that, like about how Dwight, like, he's such a jerk, but he gets like basically beat up on by both Jim and Michael in the pilots. So, you are seeing this character sort of get their just desserts in the way. And someone's mentioning when Jim let Michael fall into the koi pond was a favorite moment. One comment that I definitely wanted to hit from the chat was, we talked a little bit about like how awful Michael is, and how they sort of made that turn to make him likable. Like in the pilot, like he's doing like so many offensive accents in like 20 minutes. Doing like, he does like Asian accent, he does like a voice and gets a look from Stanley that I think is a chilling look that was completely appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And
he does Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. He does a Hitler.
He says, I'm a student of comedy, and his first instinct is to do a Hitler impression.
Yes. I love his whole, like, he's like, a friend first, a boss second, performer third, I think. And it's just like, no, that should not be on the list. A comment that was in the chat was someone saying, when Michael says, my children, with that voice, and doesn't realize that he's addressing Stanley, it rings as a very true moment for me as an African-American viewer, not one tinged with irony. Found it refreshing, true to life, and funny whenever the show went there, which I thought was a really interesting comment. Like, there's something that I thought about lately is that there's so little representation of people who like have the same background I do, because I come from like a mixed race background. I'm Hawaiian and Puerto Rican, and so like whenever there's, even like when my characters that are like me are getting beat up on, I'm like, yes, like I'm glad to be represented somehow. So it was really interesting to like see them having that, and like especially at the time there was like so little on TV that was like, so many shows just don't have any minority characters, so they don't have to deal with it.
At this time, it was definitely seen as like, it was an attempt at the step in the right direction. As I said, like people were like, look, we see racism, but it was like, we see racism from very much our point of view. Yes. It's a thing white people are, it's tough for us, like, which almost, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it was stepping towards definitely.
And the writers' room, like, they had Mindy Kaling, and they thought they're the most diverse writers' room, but it's because they had like, a couple of minority writers, and it's something that has evolved a lot since then. One comment that I saw in the chat, actually a couple, where someone's talking about Scott's Tots that came later in the series.
Oh God.
That's another like, great attempt at like trying to make Michael likable. Like he totally lets down these kids, but like he was like trying to do a good thing, and you're like, oh, that you should not have done that. But also, it's a little endearing. Tiff,
that's like Michael summed up though.
Sorry, Chad. What are you saying, Chad?
I said that's like Michael summed up though. Like you tried to do a good thing, but not quite there.
Like he thinks he's the big entertainer. He thinks he's like bringing joy into this office. I was curious. Chad, do you have other thoughts on like what is it that is sort of that core of that character that we see here and that evolves over the series?
Well, it's definitely not right to see characters like be racist to say that racism is wrong. But what changes for Michael starting in the second season, like right away with, I think it's the Dundies that's first, is that we see that it comes from a place of naivety and not from a place of hatred. And he's always trying to be better. When we get to Gay Witch Hunt at the beginning of season 3, he's crying at the end because oh, Oscar, I'm so sorry I called you the F word. Let's make this right. And yes, he does. He tries to do a good thing, but takes it too far and does it wrong. And that's when he kisses Oscar, and it's a whole thing. But as we progress, and especially once he meets Holly, was something that we focused on our show, Michael exponentially grows as a person and gets a lot better and actively seeks out making amends. Like his whole last season, when we started to realize that Michael was going to be leaving, was about calling back to earlier wrongs committed in the show, and like apologizing to those characters, maybe not by outright saying I'm sorry, but in Goodbye Michael at the end of season 7, he has Phyllis knit him an oven mitt, and that flashes back to season 2's Christmas party episode when he rebuffed her homemade oven mitt gift, or it wasn't exactly oven mitt both times, but Michael gets a lot better at actively trying to be a better person, and it starts in that place of naivety, but he definitely grows from there.
They say that when a song, if I can digress, that when a song gets stuck in your head, it's that like your brain, there's some aspect of it that your brain almost gets and doesn't quite like, it's a weird chord or a weird lyric. And so so it becomes like something that you keep chewing up and keep returning to. And I kind of feel like Michael is the same way from like season 2 on. They in this really there's this deft writing of like, he almost gets it. He gets so close to getting it, and then he doesn't get it in such an interesting way that it really hooks you as a viewer, that you're almost like, oh, come on, you're getting closer, get there. And it's like the character in the show, gets stuck in your head in the same way. That's
really
a weird
interesting.
metaphor. Sorry.
No, I like it. I, as someone who gets songs stuck in my head constantly, and I just had like I had like video game music from when I was a kid stuck in my head earlier today. I don't know why.
Your brain was trying to figure it out.
Apparently. Tiff, I was sort of curious about your thoughts. It seemed like you were lighting up a little during that. I was sort of curious, like, what you thought of like that evolution. Like, who do you like? Michael, I think, makes such a big arc over the course of the show. Are there other characters that you feel like really like change a lot from how we see them in the pilots? Is he the one that makes the most change? Like, what do you think, Tiff?
Maybe not in the pilot, but in the second episode when we first meet Kelly, I feel like her character drastically shifts. Like she starts off as like this dowdy, kind of forgettable character that gets pigeonholed because it's like this diversity day thing, and she ends up slapping Michael. It's this whole thing. And then all of a sudden she's like this fashionable, chatty, like funny, like just she becomes a light, whereas before she was just kind of background. And so I think that the Kelly change, even though it is pretty quick, I feel like, you know, Mindy probably like found that character and evolved it. I mean, she is one of the writers in the show, so I'm sure she had a heavy hand on the creation of her own character. I don't know for sure, I'm assuming, but yeah, she definitely becomes so much more than she starts off as in the very beginning of this series. And I mean, Pam has a big change. I feel like we could just look at everyone's hair.
There was a comment here about like how Michael's hair in the first season and the pilot is so terrible. And
I feel like just watch everyone's hair evolution, and then you can see like how advanced the characters get based on it's also getting like better hair.
All of them like became stars over the course of this show, and so like, you know, like not everybody like wants to be like the schlubby one anymore as they get after seasons, and they're like, no, I'm gonna look better than this on TV. You know, I remember I read Mindy's first book where she talks about how like, you know, how much she was like, I'm not going to be that look for the character anymore. We have to fix this. Don't make me like, give me some hair extensions. Let's do this. And you know, I think that they really did, like, all these characters really evolved, and you know, it was one of the shows where you could watch it and sort of like watch that evolution happen, which I think that you know, some sitcoms, like, it's very little changing from episode to episode, but I think there was more of an arc than some shows have here, which is a really interesting. One comment from the chat, they were mentioning, you know, they thought they weren't really sure what to do with Kelly's character at first. You know, I think that's sort of clear in episode 2. I know that Mindy Kaling has talked about how, you know, when she came on the show, it was like as a writer, but with the option to maybe be a character, and they weren't even sure if that was going to happen yet. Someone else mentioned Kelly and Ryan are at their best when they're working off of each other. I definitely agree with that. I think that's one of those like key dynamics. And then, you know, we get Angela and Dwight, and so you sort of pair everybody off as the show continues. And it's really interesting to see the way they do that over the years. Let me see. One other thing I wanted to touch on before we go was, you know, it's interesting looking at this in the context of sort of like they really deal with some economic stuff here too, like how terrified everybody is when there's downsizing, like when they think like, oh, I might be the one to get fired, and Michael is such a jerk that he like fake fires someone as a prank when he's the boss, which you can't do. So yeah, I was curious, like, Chad, what was your sort of thought on like that moment? I feel like that's like the most, like, one of the most cringy moments in the episode is like I thought Jenna Fisher did such a good job of just like crying, and like you're like, oh man, like I can't believe this is going on this long. But yeah, do you have any thoughts?
We get two good glimpses into characters in that scene. I think the first is Pam, we sort of see ourselves earlier in the episode. She was talking about with Jim, I could take or leave this job. I don't care if I get fired. I don't want to work here forever anyways. It's no little girl's dream to be a receptionist when she grows up. But when she's fired, I mean, it becomes a lot more real at that time. And so we see that change, and she gets defensive, and we definitely feel for her then. And then we also get to see Ryan, and Ryan is all of us in that moment where he's like, I have no part of this. No, I am not an accomplice. Please do not use that word. And I thought it was really strange to see the lack of compassion from Pam to Michael in this episode for obvious reasons. But that was something that really gets highlighted as the show progresses. It's kind of a little bit of a meme on my podcast that my favorite episode is Business School in season 3, when we have that fantastic Pam art show and Michael shows up and he says, wow, these could be tracings. I'm so proud of you. That is our building, and we sell paper. And he's emotional after having gone through the ringer with Ryan and demoting him to the annex with Kelly again. And so we really don't see any of that between those two characters in the pilot. There's even the moment when Jan shows up and Michael's like, well, I didn't get the agenda. What's supposed to be going on? And Pam says, well, she just throws him under the bus. You threw it in the garbage can, Michael. That's what happened to it. So there's no like trying to save Michael's skin or anything like that. And that moment where he fake fires her is really like, that's why, because that's the kind of person Michael is at the beginning of the series. And so it's really great that they do end up changing that as we get into the next season. And I wanted to point out just a moment at the end of this episode too, that I don't think there's a complete 100% lack of compassion for the employees towards Michael, probably from most of them, but at least from Jim. I know he's not our favorite character in this episode necessarily, but with Jim, he includes Michael in the joke. And we know that that's like Michael's favorite thing. Like Jim puts Michael in on the joke. Here, you can have something in Jell-O too. We made dessert jokes earlier. Remember that?
Like
and it's a nice note to end on.
He likes being pranked.
Right. He likes being pranked. He likes to have that laugh with everybody. If Michael's getting pranked, he's just like Dwight. Maybe that's not a good thing, but he's an employee of the office.
But when did he do it? Did he bring that with him also? Was it in the car all day? Did he take a break halfway through? It's not what I should be worrying about. But I was worried about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that Jim is the best master of time management with his job. I was curious, like Tiff, do you have thoughts on like that sort of prank war and bringing Michael into that? I know you mentioned how much you would love to be the prankster in the office and work with him. So I was curious about your thoughts.
I think it's great that he ends it like, well, not he, but the show ends the pilot with Jim passing on the pranks into Michael's office. I actually forgot that was the thing. It's like such a quick little shot. And it's one of those things, if you're watching the show in the background and you're not staring at the screen, that's something that's so easy to miss. Even like rewatch after rewatch, you have to actually be looking, because it's that's a lot of the things in this series is these great silent moments that you get to experience. And I think that that's a testament to like the good acting and the fun writing that they can write scenes like that. So I really I enjoy that. And I think that there's a lot of really great little pranks throughout the pilot that you forget is condensed into this one episode. I think that they're, mentally you can spread them out, and they have those clips of all the Jim and Dwight pranks that you can watch on YouTube, like back to back to back to back. And then there's even, I believe The Office itself has kind of a clip show when Jim is reminiscing of all his time wastings. I think maybe it's an episode where he's getting reprimanded by Toby or something like that. And so we get to see all of this stuff like back to back to back. And a lot of them are from the pilot, right? Like, and so I think that is, I think that that's really a fun way to set it off, because that's what you want to entice audiences with. And this is also, the pilot is written by Ricky Gervais, right? So among a couple other people, but so a lot of these moments and a lot of these character choices, and there's a reason it relates back to the UK office. Like it's basically part of his brainchild. So it's it all makes sense.
Yeah, some of the other comments from the chat I wanted to mention. Someone was mentioning how they love Kelly and they love Creed, who is fantastic.
Who never
mentioned Creed was
changes.
amazing. Yeah,
Never.
exactly. Creed is like the most consistent character on the show. He's just always a psychopath through the whole
I don't know. I
thing.
think he might be Dwight's looper though.
I like it. Yeah.
There's a
Exactly.
chance.
He's part of, if we cut forward far enough, that would have been the conclusion if they would have done that spin-off with Dwight they were planning on doing. I was really curious where that would have gone, where they were setting up the farm and Dwight and Mose and how that could have been another series for here, but alas, we did not get that.
Yeah,
Also
we
people
couldn't get the
mentioning,
Tortellis out of we couldn't get the Tortellis out of Cheers. You know, you get the
Yeah.
Frasier that you get.
Yeah, if you don't get the pilot that's planted and they try to make it a thing and never quite happens. Also, someone was mentioning Phyllis, which is a very small part of the pilot, but just what a great character she is, and it was interesting. It's funny how they find these romances for basically every character. It was like Phyllis and Bob Vance, and I always found that very endearing between them, and they mentioned Vance Refrigeration pretty early in the series too, so you sort of have this world set up, so it's oh well, here's this character coming from next door. And I was curious, Chad, do you have thoughts on how they sort of kept exploring from the pilot going forward? We're almost out of time, so just wanted to give a chance to talk about sort of the series going forward from here a little bit.
Well, something that I've always been really keen on is I've always viewed this show as a drama that is very, very funny. I think there are so many great relationships, and I'm not just talking about the couples, I'm talking about interactions between desk clumps. So you see the accountants, and we get the web series, The Accountants, in season 2 that won an Emmy, I think. And that's really interesting to see those three acting together, with Angela and Oscar sort of being the mom and dad, and Kevin being the little child over there that we were trying to keep from eating glue. And just seeing all these characters who, they seem to hate each other sometimes. They prank each other. They make snarky comments at each other. But when we get to Jim and Pam's wedding in season 6, guess who's there? The entire office. And it's not necessarily just because they got the long weekend for it, I suppose. And even when the baby is born, when Cece is born, they're all at the hospital waiting to congratulate Pam and see that everything went well. And as the show progresses, there's all those little moments where we see them enjoying each other's company outside of work too. So we see that there is genuine friendship there. There is genuine relationship, and that they like each other and they enjoy their time spent with each other. We see that in Local Ad is another great episode where Michael says, you know what, I want to make this ad, and I want to make it with the people I have in-house. And it's nonsensical, but it's really sweet. And everybody's so proud to have been a part of that. You even see Stanley smiling in the bar, looking at the ad yeah, I was a part of that. That's me. That's us. That's our company. And so there's a pride that comes with what they're doing, and with having those friendships, and where we see them end the series with Oscar being the godfather, and Pam being Dwight's best friend, and all these things that you never would have suspected looking at this pilot episode. That's what draws me into this series more than anything, and seeing how they grow. And that's why I made a podcast, because I was like, these characters are so good.
Yeah, someone was mentioning in the chat, they were asking about whether or not Kevin ever got a relationship. I was like, I don't think he did. I saw when he was on his podcast, he mentioned how he pitched the idea of him and Aaron, Ellie Kemper's character, who comes along later in the series, maybe getting together. I mean, they are both kind of idiots, so it could have made sense. But it was not to be. We're just wrapping up, but I think it's really funny that so many of the Office cast went on to are doing podcasts about the Office now. We have 2 podcasts featuring cast members, and now Wayne Wilson has a new character podcast out. So it's appropriate we have a couple podcasters as guests tonight. Tiff, I was curious, do you have any closing thoughts on anything you feel like we missed, or anything you wanted to share about the Office before we get out of here?
Yeah, to kind of go off on what Chad was saying, is with the idea of the people. I mean, Michael brings it up in the pilot. He says that the people are the most important part of the Office, and that it's that's the synopsis. Like that's the tagline, like underneath the show. And that's what we see carried forward almost all the time, like the idea that this is a family. And even though they are dysfunctional and like Eliza brought up, you brought up about the idea of everyone, we kind of love each other, and that's what it is. And I think that humanity of it is what brings people back to The Office over and over again. And it is having like new watchers fall in love with it all the time. Like people who are like now teenagers are watching it for the first time and absolutely loving it. Like I have friends whose teenage daughters and sons are watching The Office, and it's so great. And it won't die. Like it just keeps on living again and again, and it becomes people's addiction show. And we're here talking about it for that reason. We're here podcasting about it for that reason. There's just something about it. It's the song stuck in our brain, right? Like that we just can't get it out of it. We just keeping watching.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned like a peak. Yeah, like we were mentioning like Peacock starting up, and like The Office is like their thing that they are building around. Like it was Netflix's like one of their most watched shows, and now like Peacock, they have like the extended episodes you can watch. There's all sorts of stuff for the hardcore Office fans to dive into. Eliza, I was curious, do you have any other closing thoughts you wanted to share, maybe about like what was great about the series, and like you said, eventually came to love, and how far we've come since this pilot?
I mean, I think we've what have we not said except the warehouse. We haven't even talked about the warehouse.
The warehouse.
So there's a whole other world within the world.
Exactly. I mean,
and I think that was a great opportunity, a great demonstration of them getting like class issues into it, and using this community that they developed to represent more and more of the community that we all live in. I think it started off as like, this is like an office that you've worked in, right? And then it's like, oh, this is like a world that we've lived in.
Yeah, it really is. Like they built such a big world. There's like other branches of the company. They find a way to slip in a Ricky Gervais cameo. There's like all sorts of things they do as the show grows, and they basically explored like every corner they could before it ended up leaving the network. But I just wanted to thank all of you so much for being with us. I would like to thank our panel. Thanks to Eliza Skinner, Chad Hopkins, and Tiff Arment. Go follow them on social media. Go listen to the podcasts, Somehow I Manage, and An American Workplace, that is a Chad's podcast. And be sure to follow Eliza on her million projects that she is always doing. Go watch Earth to Net on Disney Plus and everything else that Eliza's involved with. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I hope to see you back again for another TV Pilot Club down the road.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.